So the film rewinds itself and replays again and again more rioting in an American city on Sunday night, this time back in Minneapolis, ground zero, the place where our Groundhog's Day nightmare began a year ago. In a possible preview of the rioting that will probably happen when the Derek Chauvin trial concludes, no matter how it concludes, BLM militants smashed police cars, assaulted police officers, vandalized police stations, looted local businesses. Video footage shows the pillagers ransacking shoe stores, auto parts retailers, pharmacies, dollar stores, even pizza restaurants. A Little Caesars, they rioted, stole some packages of dough, I guess. I don't know why. As we've learned in recent months, no ointment can numb the pain of systemic racism quite like an armful of stolen merchandise. At least that's what we're supposed to believe. Now, the thing that caused the latest round of rioting is, as always, the depravity and moral degeneracy of the rioters themselves. That's really what causes it. But the ostensible excuse, the cover for the chaos, is the death of a man named Dante Wright, who was shot and killed by Brooklyn Center police during a traffic stop earlier in the afternoon. Brooklyn Center is a town, I think, to the north of Minneapolis, nearby. Not many details are currently available about this incident, and as of yet, the body cam footage has not been released. The details don't matter anyway, right? They never do. BLM has its narrative, which is always the same narrative, and is adjusted only to include the few sketchy and superficial details that get imprinted immediately onto the public conscious, right? In this case, the detail is that Wright was pulled over allegedly for an air freshener. Now, to hear people on Twitter tell it, and I have seen it phrased exactly this way, Wright was shot by the cops for having an air freshener. They pulled him out of the car, executed him on the spot for the air freshener. But really because they're racist. This is the narrative. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. And incidentally, it is almost certainly not true, as any rational person would immediately suspect. Doesn't mean the shooting was justified, but any person with a brain knows when they hear that story, there's got to be more to it, right? Based on the few seemingly reliable details that have been provided, Wright was initially pulled over for a traffic violation. Maybe it was the air freshener, doesn't really matter. But then it was discovered that he had an outstanding warrant. Officers tried to apprehend him, but he ran back to his vehicle. He was shot. At some point during that process, he drove away and crashed shortly after. As journalist Andy No reports, Wright had previously posted many pictures on social media of himself flashing gang signs, using drugs, and so on. Now, none of this makes the shooting justified, but it does point to there being more to the story than just an innocent guy with an air freshener. There's always more to the story, of course. It's possible that the shooting was still unjustified, that he was murdered, that it's all as bad or nearly as bad as BLM says it is. But if that's the case, it will be by mere happenstance. BLM will automatically claim that every shooting of a black man by police is a racist execution. Perhaps one of these days they'll accidentally be right. I mean, they haven't been right even once so far about everything. When you take any individual incident, all the things that BLM says about that incident, they've never been right about all of those things. And in terms of the most basic claim of a cop shooting a black man because of racism, they have literally never been right about that. That has never turned out to be true. Not once. Maybe this will be the one occasion where they're right. I doubt whether this is such an occasion, but I'll wait for time and evidence to tell the whole story. Whatever really happened with Dante Wright, what we can say for sure is that the average BLM or Antifa radical out in the streets protesting doesn't care what really happened with Dante Wright. Even less do they care about police brutality or fascism. Least of all do they feel any actual pain over the loss of life. The anger is performance. The tears are for show. This is all one big stage play. When they're out in the street crying because of Dante Wright, I don't believe the tears, and you shouldn't either. The only thing that's real is the physical destruction they cause. Everything else is fake. Now, if that seems like a harsh assessment, consider the fact that between January 1st, 2020, and March 31st, 2021, over these past 15 or 16 months, when rioting over alleged police brutality has been so on trend, there have been 507 white people shot to death by police, compared to 271 black people. And yet somehow, nobody knows the name of any of those white people, save one, Ashley Babbitt. She was an unarmed woman shot in the neck and killed by Capitol Police on January 6th. We know her name not because BLM rallied to her cause, but because they so conspicuously refused to rally to her cause. Indeed, her death was more likely to be celebrated by the very people who'd spent the previous year pretending to care about the killing of unarmed civilians. Anytime you see someone with BLM in their Twitter profile, and they're lamenting the death of Daunte Wright or George Floyd or anyone else, search their name and then the name Ashley Babbitt and see what they had to say about her. Because I will tell you right now, it's either nothing or they were celebrating it. Aside from Babbitt, the names of the other white people killed by police are known only to their families and friends. Not one protest has been staged on their behalf. Not one riot has broken out. Not one building burned in their honor. Not one pair of shoes looted from a Foot Locker. It's a curious thing that those who are still overwhelmed by the pain of George Floyd's death a year later, they haven't gotten over it. They didn't know him. They didn't know anything about him. They're overwhelmed by the pain. It's curious that they can be so selective in that pain. Was Floyd more deserving of mourning? Was Daunte Wright more deserving of mourning than any average white person killed by the cops? Now, the excuse most commonly given for this disparity in coverage and outrage is that while black people are killed by police less often, when you account for population disparities, they are still more likely to be killed by police. And I've addressed this claim many times. Now, even if this statistic needed no qualification, how does that explain or justify the fact that people who protest alleged police brutality never protest alleged police brutality against white people? The fact that it happens proportionally less often, that means that it's not an outrage? It's not a tragedy? The fact that black people are more likely to be killed by police means that George Floyd's death warrants a year of public wailing and mourning, and the death of a white man warrants no public wailing or mourning at all? Okay, because the proportionality of outrage is there's 0%. You want to talk about percentages? You want to say that there's a smaller percentage of white people killed by cops. Okay. But the percentage of outrage over those killings is 0%. It appears that the Black Lives Matter crowd really does believe that only Black lives matter. Or at least that they matter quite a bit more than white lives. What other conclusion could one draw? Now, as it happens, the statistic cited earlier does require a qualification. Yes, a black person is more likely to be killed by police, but a black person is also more likely to commit violent crime. If we're talking about proportionality, we have to look at the whole picture. The whole picture, even after just a glance, severely complicates the simplified racial narrative that you hear from the BLM set. But again, this is beside the present point. That doesn't even matter for the point that I'm making here. No statistic can explain why the emotional reaction from the so-called anti-fascists should be so selective. Why they should remain sitting on their hands while white people are shot dead, waiting until someone with a darker skin tone suffers that same fate. Real moral outrage doesn't work like that. And that's how we know that none of the outrage we're seeing is real. None of it is real. It is all performance. It is all fake. It is ideological, really, when it comes down to it. And we should always remember that, especially in the months ahead, because there's going to be a lot more of this, a lot more. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.